So, so we had a statement from Abaya, which was 7 lines from the bottom of Daf Tzadi Gimel. I'm not going to read it again, which was that Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, which was a Tana we had yesterday, who said that if you steal wool and wool from a sheep, and not you steal, you shear a sheep, right? And then you start dyeing or cleaning the wool. And then it's changed, and you can no longer combine it with other wool to make a chiyuv, a responsibility to give it to the kohen. So that was a principle that if you change the object, you change the halachic status. Said Abaya, that opinion is consistent with the opinion of Beit Shammai, who says that if you give a woman flour for payment for sex, for prostitution, and she then takes that flour and takes the flour and bakes it, or you give her grain even, and she makes it into flour and then bakes it, that she cannot bring it on the Mizbeach, even though she's changed it. And Beit Hillel argued. And the third opinion that says something similar is where we are starting today, which is 8 lines from the top. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Mahi. What is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who says that if you change an object, you change its halachic you do not change the halachic status. Sorry, even though you changed it, halachic status does not change. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Harisha Gazal Sa'a Shalchitin. Let's say a person goes out and they steal a large quantity of grain. Right? They go to the supermarket and they shoplift. They take a basket of chitin, of grain, of flour, of wheat, and they take it home. Tachana, they grind it. Lasha, they knead it. Afa, they bake it. V'hifrish mimenu chala. Then they come to bake this whole thing, this stolen grain, basically, and they say, okay, it's time for me to take off challah because I'm baking a whole quantity. Ketzan mivarech. How could that person make a bracha? Or if they ask, what is the bracha? Says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Ein zeh mivarech ela min ha'etz. This is not something you bless. This is a curse if you say thank you to Hashem for that. Al zeh ne'emar, this is what the pasuk is referring to. Botseya beirach, the one who steals and makes a bracha, ni'etz Hashem. They're pushing off. They're cursing. They're going against Hashem. So you see that even though you changed the object, because the thing you stole was the flour, right, or the grain. You changed it into flour and you baked it and you kneaded it, you made it challah. By the time you made it challah, it was no longer recognizable, but still, it's a cursed thing. You're not supposed to make a bracha on it. There's a whole debate about whether this is practical or it's after the fact, like, do you make a bracha if you steal something? But nonetheless, that is what Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says. So that's the third one. The fourth one is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Maihi, what's that one? The Tanya. Plal Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Did I read the wrong words? Anyways, there was a principle that was said by Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and this is very confusing. So we are trying to find it around 15 lines from the top. Kol shevach she'eshpiach gazlan yado al ha'elyona. If a robber makes something better, let's say you steal someone's lamb. And you feed it, you fatten it, you give it antibiotics, and you do all the good things for it, and it gets much larger, it gets chubbier, it gets worth much more, it grows a lot of hair because of what you did. So then it was $100 when you stole it, you invested heavily in this thing. A year later, when they catch up with you, it's worth $200. Says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, the shevach that you increased the gezela, yado al ha'elyona, the gazlan has the upper hand. What does that mean? They have the upper hand. The ratzan notel shvacho. If they want, they can keep the whole thing and just pay the $100 that it was worth in the beginning and keep the extra. Ratzah, if he wants, they can just give it back to this person they stole it from. What does that mean? They can just give it back. That doesn't make any sense. If you want to, it's not a desire. That's like you're losing money if you do that, right? Michael Amar, what are you saying? Amar Sheshet, no. Says Sheshet, it means something different. It means you steal a lamb that's worth $100, right? You can either invest and feed it and take good care of it and increase its value to $200, or you can neglect it and decrease, and now it's worth $50, right? Because it's a starving, emaciated lamb. So says the Braita, Kamma, Hishbicha, if the gazlan makes the lamb, the animal, and it doesn't have to be an animal, of course, it can be anything you steal, more valuable by investing money or time into it, notel shvacho, then you can keep that thing. Right? Because you only have to pay back what you stole. You stole an animal worth $100. You pay back $100. But kichesh, let's say it weakened. Let's say the lamb or the animal or the object you got weaker and is worth less. Then you don't have to pay the guy you stole it from what it was when you stole it. You can say, oh, here's your lamb back. Sorry, it's skinny. Why? Because even though you changed it, this is an opinion that even though you've changed something, it doesn't change the status. And so although I stole a lamb, I made it decreased in value because it got weaker. That's not considered to be a change, or it is a change, but it doesn't change the halachic status. I can just give it back to you. Says, well, if that doesn't make any sense, it's not consistent. How could you say it's not a change if it gets weaker, but it is a change if it gets stronger, right? Yachi, afilo shpiach nami. So then even if you made the lamb worth more, if you're not considering a change to be meaningful, can you keep it? If you're the gazlan, if you're the robber, you should have to give back the animal, because even though you changed it, you didn't acquire it, you have to give it back, right? Why would it be that if it got weaker, you can give it back and say, oh, here's your animal. But if it got stronger, you don't have to say that. Says the Gemara, you know why? This is something we've had many times before, which is that, in fact, changing the animal doesn't change it. So really, you should give it back, whether it's a skinnier animal or a fatter animal, whether it's worth more or worth less. But they knew that if you tell a person, look, you invested 2 years in fattening up this cow, but you got to give it back, no one's going to do tshuva. They're never going to agree to give it back. And so even though technically you should be able to give it back, the halacha is that you're not allowed to.
So would it have to be the same animal or an animal similar to it?
No. So if you hold takanat shavim, then you just give back the value. So you don't have to give back an animal at all. You'd say whatever the animal was, which is what our Mishnah said, right? Whatever the animal was worth when you stole it, that's what you pay back.
Okay.
But if it got weaker, you can just give back the animal. You don't have to pay the sum. So you win no matter what, basically, is what the gazlan. And again, it seems unfair, and we're going to discuss this much more later today, but we also want people to do tshuva, right? So therefore we make incentives for them to make it easier.
Well, we discussed this about 30 daf ago, when there was an increase in value, or was a decrease in value.
We did discuss it 30 daf ago. We're going to discuss it again, the same Gemara later today, and we're going to discuss it at the end of today again. So you'll have it 3 times today. This is the first of 3. But that's correct. Rabbi Yishmael, what's the 5th opinion, the 5th one, where someone says, even though we change an object, it doesn't change its status. Maihi, the Tanya says the Braita, mitzvat pe'ah, right? There's a mitzvah in the Torah, very important mitzvah, one of the 613 mitzvot, to take pe'ah, right? To give the corner of your field to a poor person, right? To leave it behind. The real mitzvah is not to harvest the corner of the field. It's la'afrish min kamma, to separate pe'ah when the stalks are still standing, meaning to say, this corner of the field is pe'ah, I'm not harvesting it, let the aniyim come and take it. Let's say you don't do that. You plow, no, you don't plow, you harvest the whole field, right? So then, remember, after you cut down the stalks, you turn them into little bundles, right? So then, lo yifrish min kamma, if you don't separate pe'ah from the standing grain, then he mafrish min omarim. Then you should separate it from the omer, which is, of course, the karban ha'omer, right? The bundles that they would make at Shavuot. So therefore, you separate the bundles, meaning leave behind some bundles for the poor people. Let's say you don't, and after you make bundles, what do? You turn it into haystacks, the piles, right? Lo yifrish min omarim. If you don't separate it when they're bundles, mafrish min kri. Then you separate it when you make the haystacks. They're not haystacks, but they're piles. Kri is the pile of grain, right? Now, ad shelo mircho. That only works until you smooth out and finalize the piles, because that is the time where you don't have to pay maaser. Remember, you don't pay maaser, you're not chayav in maaser and grain until you finish the production of it. And finishing the production is not grinding it. It's taking the grain, cutting it, binding it together, making a pile out of it, and smoothing over that pile. Once you do meriach, once you start smoothing it over and cleaning it, fashioning it, then you have to give maaser. And if you haven't given pe'ah yet, what you have to then do is first take off maaser and then give pe'ah, right? Because you can't give to the ani, which is what you owe to the Levi and the Kohen, right? So first mircho, if you already smoothed over the pile, then maaser, you then take off maaser, and then you notain lo, then you give it to the ani. Again, all of that is considered, you didn't really change the grain. You cut it down, you put piles, but you didn't actually do anything to it, right? It's still the same grain. However, Mishum Rabbi Yishmael Amru, you know what, says Rabbi Yishmael, Af mafrish min ha'isa. Even if you keep going and you grind the grain and you separate it and you do everything and you make it into dough, you still have a responsibility to give pe'ah. Why? You changed it. So clearly Rabbi Yishmael holds that even though you changed the status of it from grain to flour to dough, you didn't remove the responsibility of pe'ah. V'notein lo. Amar le Rav Papa l'Abaye. Said Rav Papa to Abaye at the end of all 5 of these
Doctor, I think you have to even give peah if you bake the dough into bread and you have not, and it's from wheat that has not had peah taken.
Wait, I'm sorry. Say that again, Charlie.
So even if you bake the dough into wheat and peah, it was from field where peah was not taken, I think you still have to give peah
Well, that's
from the
Rabbi
wheat.
Yishmael's opinion. That's what Rabbi Yishmael just said. The Chachamim
Kind of
don't.
Rabbi Yishmael, yeah.
But that's the machloket, the Chachamim and Rabbi Yishmael. Said Rav Papa to Abaya, I don't get it, halfway down. Ichmo kohani tanai la'ashvinin kebeit Shammai. I don't get it. All these Tanaim are going over backwards to pasuk Beit Shammai that a shinoi b'mekomo omeid, that even though you change it, it still stays in the same status. We don't usually pasuk Beit Shammai. Amalei, so Abaya said, no, hachi kamer. This is what they would say. Lo nechleku Beit Shammai beitila b'davar zeh. They would all say that it's not correct to say that Beit Shammai argues with Beit Hillel, that Beit Shammai stated that, but Beit Hillel agrees with Beit Shammai. So the opinion that Beit Shammai disagreed with Beit Hillel, if you recall yesterday, was this opinion of Rav Yosef from Guryan Dimi Aspork, right? But these people would disagree with that. Now, says Rava, I don't agree with anything you just said, Abaya. Amar Rava, Mimai, how can you prove from any of these cases that any of these Tanaim, any of the 5 say that even if you change an object, you don't change its halachic status? These are all unusual cases. And we're going to go through one at a time to show why they're unusual. Dilma, Adkan Lokam Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Hatam. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda yesterday only said that if you take wool, right, and you clean it, and you dye it, that it's still chayav and reshita gez. That's not because you don't think that a change matters. It's because, remember, we said yesterday, dyeing it is not a permanent change because you could wash it off, right? So therefore, ela b'tseva, you only said that by dyeing, since you can get it out with the famous soap, the French soap we talked about, right? You can use your soap and get rid of the dye. So dyeing it is not considered a fundamental problem, a change. Beit Shammai only said by an etnan, by a prostitution, if you take the grain and you turn it into flour and you bake it, it's still usser. That's not because a shinoi doesn't matter. It's because there's much higher standards when you're talking about the mizbeach. Generally, a shinoi matters, but when you come to God, it's a little different, right? Hatam el gavoa mishum imes. It's disgusting. It's not appropriate. That doesn't mean that by gezela and by other things, a shinoi wouldn't matter. The same thing would be true, similar, by the bracha, that not that challah is not changed if you steal grain and you turn it into bread, and then you make it dough, and then you make it bread. Sure, it's different, but you don't make a bracha mishum dahavim mitzvah haba ba'avira, right? It's a whole different problem that we've talked about, which is that you can't do a good thing from an act that was a bad thing. It's called mitzvah haba ba'avira, not because the shinoi doesn't matter. It did change, but it's still an avera that led to this mitzvah. Reb Shimon ben Elazar, remember, said that if you steal something and it gets weaker, right, you can just give it back. How can you give it back? It was changed, right? That only, says Rava, is b'hakchashad hadar. That's referring, the reason that Reb Shimon ben Elazar says that is because if you take an animal and you make it weaker, you didn't really change it. You just starved it. But once you feed it again, it's going to get strong again. And so although you did sort of change it, it's not a permanent change, and therefore it's not something that changes the status. But that's why, it's because it's specifically referring to weakening it in a way that will be reversible. And finally, Adkan Lukamar Rabbi Yishmael Hatam, the case that Charlie pointed out, that Rabbi Yishmael only said that by pe'ah, even if you bake it into dough, you have to take pe'ah from
Does that
it.
mean if you made it stronger, be the same thing? Because you could then starve it again?
Potentially. Remember, the halacha, he said, it's a good question. We're going to get to it in a little detail. But the halacha, he said earlier, was that if you make it stronger, you actually get to keep the benefit, because we want to encourage people to do tshuva and give it back. So it's asymmetrical, right? It's only if it's weaker. The question that we're going to discuss in a second is, what if you make it weaker in a way that's permanent, right? That we'll never recover from. So Rava's of the opinion, as we'll see, as we just said, that the halacha is only if you make it weaker in an irreversible way, in a reversible way. If you make it weaker in an irreversible way, then it would be a shinoi. But we're going to discuss that in 2 minutes. The fifth case, though, was the case of pe'ah, right? So the Rabbi Yishmael said that even if you didn't take pe'ah from your grain, and then even if you cut it and harvested it and blah, 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 and piled it up and made it into grain and baked it, you still have to take pe'ah. Why? Didn't you change it? You did change it. but Peah has a very unique halacha. And the reason that Peah is different, Lo kam Rabbi Shmuel hatam el le'inyan Peah, mishum dechtiv ta'azov yetera. It says the word, if you remember the pasuk in Emor, right? It says, I have it on my side here. It says, don't cut off the corners of your field, right? And then it continues and says, la'ani v'lager ta'azovota, right? You should leave them behind for an ani and a ger. And then the next pasuk, or not the next pasuk, but a few psukim later, a few prakim later, actually, it says the same thing again. It says, la'ani v'lager ta'azovota, right? So as we darshan, it says ta'azov several times, extra times, leave it behind. And that tells you specifically by Peah that there's an extra requirement to leave it behind, even if you've changed it. Says the word, well, 1 second, but if you learn that by Peah, why don't we learn that from everywhere else? That if it's true by Peah, that when you change it, you still have to give Peah, maybe it's true everywhere. V'ligmar mina, am I there? Yeah. If you're going to say, learn everything out from Peah, matanot aniyim shani. It's different. Any of these gifts, remember, leket, shikha, peah, which are the gifts you give to an ani, those are their own status. K'dibai Rabbi Yonatan. As Rabbi Yonatan asked, Dibai Rabbi Yonatan, my time at Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Yonatan asked this question. What, in fact, is the reason for Rabbi Shmuel says that by peah, even if you change it, you still have to give it? Is it mishum dekasavar shinoi eno koneh? Is it because he holds, like Abaya started today by saying, that even though you changed it, it doesn't change anything? Oh, Dilma, no. Ba'alma kasavar shinoi koneh. In general, a change always changes the halachic status. But hacha by peah, it's different. Mishum dichtiv ta'azov yetera. It's because it says the word ta'azov an extra time, which means leave it behind, meaning leave it behind even if you've changed it. The imtim salomon, if you're going to say ta'amad Rabbi Shmuel mishum diksavar shinoi enu koneh. Now, because if you had said that the real reason for Rabbi Shmuel is what Abaya said, it's because even though you changed it into bread, it didn't change its status. So then why does it say ta'azov extra time? Why does it say leave things behind by peah? What's that adding? Ta'azov yitera dikatav rachman alamali. And furthermore, according to the Rabbanan, who say that if you do bake your bread, you no longer give peah. So in fact, if you change it, you don't give peah. So again, what does the extra ta'azov tell you? V'tu the Rabbanan ta'azov yitera dikatav rachman alamali. They actually, both in that opinion of Rabbi Shmuel and in the Chachamim, would use it for the following halacha. The Breita says, we are at the 6th last of the narrow lines, Hamafgir karmo, right? A guy is very cheap, let's say. We call him cheap. He has a huge, beautiful vineyard, right? And he's worked on this vineyard for many, many years, and he's going to next day to harvest his vineyard, but he knows that the halacha is that you have to leave behind in a vineyard what are called olalot, right? Olalot are the misshapen grapes they're not perfect, which could be very valuable. Let's say it's 5% of the vineyard, but 5% of $1 million is a lot of money, right? And this guy really doesn't want to leave behind what the Torah says he's supposed to leave behind, but he's a very religious person, so he's going to do it. So he comes up with a great idea. He says, I'll make my vineyard hefker, okay? Now, the downside of making your vineyard, if you make something hefker, and then you acquire it from hefker, then you don't have to give anything, right? Any matnot, well, he thinks you don't have to. You do. But you would have thought you don't have to. You certainly don't have to give maaser. The problem, of course, is that if you make your vineyard hefker, you could lose the whole thing, right? Because someone could come and take it. So this guy has a brilliant idea. I'll make it hefker at midnight, and the next morning at 4 a.m., I'll go and I'll acquire it. So that's the Brishna. Hamafgir karmo, the person makes his karem, his vineyard hefker overnight. V'hishkim laboker, he wakes up the next morning and he says, okay, what a great vineyard. It's going to be mine now. Ubitzron, he harvests the whole thing. Says the Mishnah, the Breita, I guess it is, chayav b'peret ube'ololot ube'shikha ube'peah. No dice, right? You didn't get out of it. You still have to give all the matnot aniyim. Because even though you made it hefker, the Torah says ta'azov an extra time to tell you, don't play these tricks with aniyim. You still got to give it. But you are patr min ha'maaser. You can play the tricks with the Leviim, right? So you don't have to give maaser or truma.
I would do this.
But you do have to give to the aniyim because the matnot aniyim are stronger, as we would say, stickier than other matanot, other gifts. And even if you make it hefker and you sort of, or according to Rabbi Shmuel, even if you change it and you bake it, you still have to pay them. So those are essentially exceptions, not proofs to the rule. Now, says Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, 4 lines from the last narrow lines, halachak Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. When Rabbi Shimon Elazar said, he was the third one, right? The fourth one, I guess, that if you weaken an animal that you steal, that you can just give back the animal. And if you gain value, you can keep the extra value. That's the halacha. Ask the Gemara, Miyam Shmuel Achi, does Shmuel say that that's the halacha? V'amar Shmuel, this is what we were referring to before. Ein shamin, lo leganav, lo legazan, lo nizakim. This is something we discussed way back earlier in the Masechta, actually way back in Daf Yud Aleph, so that's around 80 pages ago, right? We discussed that, remember by hezek, by damage. Let's say my shar goes and kills your shar. Remember those old days in the beginning of Bava Kamma, right? The good old days. So my shar kills your shar. Your shar was worth $200. I now have to pay you, let's say chatzi nezik. I got to pay you some portion of that. But said the Gemara earlier, remember the pasuk says, "V'hamet yelo," right? That you keep the carcass, you keep the dead body. And we said earlier that you then subtract the value of the dead body from what I pay. But that's only true, says Shmuel, by hezek. It's only true by damage. It's not true by a gazlan. If I steal from you and the animal is worth less, I don't say, oh, take the value of what it's worth and include that in what I have to pay you. In fact, I just pay you the whole thing. So that goes against Reb Shimon ben Elazar, right? Goes against what we just said. Bishma the Rava now. Rava can explain this. Damar, because Rava would say, and we had this earlier in the Masechta, Ki ka'amar Reb Shimon ben Elazar hatam bak chashad hadar. Reb Shimon ben Elazar only said you can give back the animal if it's a reversible weakening. You weaken the animal, but it will get stronger again. So then it's not a shinoi, it's not a change. You can just give it back. So then it's lo kasha. Because ki ka'amar lacha Reb Shimon ben Elazar, when we said the halachas like Reb Shimon ben Elazar, that shinoi b'mikomo made it, even though you changed it, you can give it back. That's if it's a non-permanent change. Bak chashad hadar. It's a change, a weakening that you can reverse. And when Shmuel said, Shmuel ain't shamin, that you don't look at the reduced value, that was if you make a permanent damage, right? Or you weaken the animal to such an extent that it's never going to get stronger. Bak chashad de lo hadar, where it doesn't get reversed. So that would be a good explanation, according to Rava. El Abaya, who said, again, this was a machloket we had earlier in the first parak, some of this in the first parak, right? The early part we had. The other part we had just today, Rav and Abaya. The Abaya who says, Ki kamar Reb Shimon Elazar b'hakashad de lo hadar kamar. That Reb Shimon Elazar was only referring to a kashad that was it lo hadar, will never go back. So ma'ikil meimar, right? Because then it's a contradiction. Shmuel in one case said, halachas like Reb Shimon Elazar, meaning it implies that if you weaken an animal, you could just give it back. In the other case, he said, if you weaken it, you can't assess that value. As the Gemara, you're right. There's no way to reconcile that. And what Abaya would have to tell you, Abaya would have to say that it was a mistaken quote in the name of Shmuel. Ki matni, Abaya matni hachi, last line. Amar Reb Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that in fact, not the halachas like Reb Shimon ben Elazar. But if you look on the top line of Daf Tzadi Dal and Amabet, Amru, some people say halacha Reb Shimon ben Elazar. And that's a huge change. Instead of saying that is the halacha, he says some people claim that's the halacha, and the implication is, and they're wrong. The lay, lo sphere lay, but they're wrong. So some people claim that we paskin that way, but Shmuel says, I do not paskin that way. And that's how Abai would have to explain it. Whew. Says where now gets much easier, so we can take a deep breath. Top of Daf Tzadi Daled Amud Bet, second line. Says Rabbi Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan, you don't want to know something? We're going to get to our mission in a second. Dvar Torah, from the real Torah law, the real Iker law, Gezela hanishtanet chozeret beina. If you steal something and you change it, you still got to give it back. Which goes against our mission, right? And what's that based on? Shenemar, because the pasuk says, "Ve'yishiv et hagzela," return the stolen thing, asher gazal, that you stole. Whatever you stole, give back. If you took it and you made a chair, give back the chair. Too bad, right? Shenemar yeshiv et hagzela asher gazal mikol makom. Whatever it is, you got to give back what you stole. Ask the Gemara, one second. If that's halacha, then Tomar, what about Mishnatenu? Right? What about the Mishnah that started this whole parak yesterday, which was you steal wood and you build them into a chair. You don't have to give back the chair. You just give the value. So what about our Mishnah, which said that even though that when you change it, you don't have to give it back? That is Mishum Takanat HaShavim. That is only Midrabanan. The Midoraita, you're supposed to give back the wood even in the chair. but obviously people would be very hesitant. They invested all this money into taking the yarn and making a scarf and doing, making a beautiful jacket. Then you're going to make me give it all back. You're going to lose all your labor. You're going to lose all your investment. And so people won't do tshuva. And so to make it easier for people to do tshuva, they made a takana, which is only midrabanan. It's not meant from the Torah, that you could just pay back the money. And that's how you view our whole mission. That was what Rechia bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Ask the Gemara 6 lines from the top. Mi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hachi? Is it true? Did Rabbi Yochanan really say that? Rabbi Yochanan always paskins like a stam mishnah. If a mishnah is said without a name, with the many exceptions, Rabbi Yochanan paskins that way. It's not. And we have a mishnah in Masechet Chulin, which we discussed yesterday, which is talking about Reshit Hagez. Remember, Reshit Hagez, you have to take the shearings from 5 different animals, you put them together, you give them to the Kohen, right? You give part of it to the Kohen. But the Mishnah said, Lo speak no lo, you didn't give it to the Kohen from the first sheep, Achit Savo, until you dyed it, so you changed it, then you're patur. Why are you patur, right? If you hold that changing something doesn't change its status, midoraita, then why, if you dyed this thing, is it no longer chayv and Reshit Hagez? Amar lahu Rabbanan Rabbi Yaakov Shmei, one of the students, one of the rabbis, had an answer, and it was Rabbi Yaakov. And he said, L'didim efarshli minei Rabbi Yochanan. I once heard Rabbi Yochanan explain this, or someone told me the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Kigon, that's not what he's referring to at all. The truth is, if you change something, it no longer has its status. What did Rabbi Yochanan mean when he said that the only reason you have to give back money and not the object is because takanat shavim? Only in the case where you actually didn't change the object, as we discussed yesterday, where you bought IKEA furniture, right? And it was already prepared, and you just put it together. So you didn't actually change it in any way. If you had changed it, of course, midoraita, you don't give it back. But Rabbi Yochanan is saying that even if it's only drabanan, you didn't change it. So you would have thought you'd have to give it back, and you really should give it back. But they made a takanat shavim that you don't have to give it back. So read that inside. The case where Rabbi Yochanan said that in the case of our Mishnah is where you stole kelim, wood that was already finished, and you turned it into a kli, into a chair. It's a change that you can undo, right? You didn't actually change the object, you just put it together. And therefore, there you might have thought, give it back. And that's where they made a takana that we don't want people to be discouraged, and therefore we don't make them give it back. Tanu Rabbanan. Says the Gemara, a very, very important braita, which is a Tosefta in Masechet Shvi'it, which I'm sure Charlie's very happy about, which says the following: Hagazlanim, people who are big-time robbers. This is how most Rishon Rambam understands this. People who are real mafiosos, right? The Malvei Bribit, people who run a bank, right? And they made millions by lending with interest, which is illegal, okay? And we'll have plenty of time in Masechet Bava Metzia to talk about how illegal it is. All of these people, says the Braita, if they come to do tshuva and they say, I illicitly gained $1 million, I want to give it all back, ein makablin mehem, you don't accept the money from them. We don't take it back because we don't want to discourage them. V'amekabel mehem, and if you do take it back, ein ruach chachamim nochei mena, the rabbis don't think highly of you. You're in the doghouse, right? Meaning it's not prohibited, but it's not a good thing. Says Rabbi Yochanan, you know what? Bimei Rebbe nishneit Mishnah. This Mishnah was taught, meaning this halacha was taught in the days of Rebbe. Because in the days of Rebbe, they had a big problem. They had a big problem that people stole a lot of money, and they didn't want to do tshuva because it was just financially impossible. It got to a point where there was just such imbalances that they had to make this halacha. The Tanya, and we have a story, an interesting story in the days of Rebbe. Ma'aseh ba'adam echad. There was once a guy who lived in the days of Rebbe. He was a big financier, right? Big Wall Street guy, stealing money from everybody. And he was super rich. Shebikesh la'asot tshuva. You remember those people on this call. He wanted to do tshuva. He started feeling guilty, came to his midlife or late life, and he said, I want to go back. All my ways were wrong. I want to return everything I stole. And he said to his family, called them together. I could see the whole scene. I want to return everything I stole. Amalei Ishto, his wife said to him, Reka, you idiot. Imatao said tshuva. If you really did tshuva and gave back everything you stole, you wouldn't even be able to keep your belt, right? You wouldn't have underwear because right, avnei means different things, but I mean we use it as belt, but it probably means like a cloak, right? But his point is, even the most basic clothing that you have nothing if you give back what you stole. Your whole life is based on stealing. And therefore, unfortunately, Nimnav lo asa tshuva. He didn't do tshuva because he thought of the financial reality. And therefore, when they heard about this story, and obviously it was Tosus explains, it was clearly something that was more common or happened in their society. They made a takana. But Dosha, at that time, Amru, they said, you know what? If you come to return, and again, there's a lot of debate about who this applies to. Is it just big time robbers who would ruin them? Right? If I steal $100, I can't get out of it by saying I would never do tshuva. So these are maybe people whose whole identity is defined by stealing, which is how I said it. Or, there's other explanations. But at that time they said, Hagazlanim u'malvei ribiot, those who steal and those who lend with interest, shechziru, if they come to do tshuva, ein mekablim mehem, don't accept the money from them. Ha'mekabel mehem, if you do, ein ruach chachamim nochei menu, the rabbis do not think highly of that. So that was a halacha they said. There's a huge debate among the Rishonim, Rabbeinu Tam, and many, many others, and the Ri and others, about whether this was specific to Rebbe's time or whether it was from Rebbe's time and onward. Right? Meaning once they make, like many takanot, like stam yayin, all these kind of things, right? They made them at a certain time, and then it keep applying, right? Rabbeinu Tam is an opinion, maybe it was difficult in his times, that this only applied in Rebbe's time, not forever. But anyways, that's not the way others seem to understand it. Meitvei. Ask the Gemara, what about the following Breita? The Breita says, Haniach lahem avihem ma'ot shel ribit. Let's say a man dies, and he leaves his children millions of dollars that all came from ribit, from interest. So all gained illicitly. Even though the kids know this, everyone knows that the way they got this fortune was through illicit activity. Ein chayavim lahachzir. They don't have to return the money to the people who stolen from because the father's dead. So now the implication of this Breita is that the children don't have to return it. Inhu, they who don't have to return it, ha'avihem chayav lachzir, that the father, had he been alive and wanted to do tshuva, would have had to return it. But Rebbe just said you never return it. Answers are no. The truth is that the father also would not have had to return it. So why did we talk about the children, the yatomim, right? The kids, the heirs? The reason we talked about the children is because the second case of the Breita, which only makes sense with the children, the next case in the Breita, and Tosus, we'll discuss this in a second, is a much different case. Let's say the father leaves his children a beautiful car that's stolen, right? Their version was a para, right? Or a talit, or a great, beautiful suit or jacket that is known to be stolen, right? But now the father's dead. Says the Breita, chol davar musuyam, anything that's identifiable, that people will see it and say, that is the jacket that was stolen from so-and-so, then chayavim lahachzir. Then they actually have to give it back. Why do they have to give it back? Why is it different than money? The reason they have to give it back is mishum kvod avihem, is because it's going to be disrespectful to their father if they're driving down the street in this, red sports car and everyone's like, that's the car that so-and-so stole, right? And even though he's dead, they have required to respect him, which is a fascinating halacha. So because that case was specifically about children who have to respect their father, Tanaresha Nami Biditu, so the first part of the Breita also talked about children. It says the Gemara, 1 second. Why are they respecting their father? Their father was a ganav, right? Why would you say that to honor their father, they have to return the stolen car or the stolen para? Ikri Khan, remember, we always read the pasuk says, you can't curse a nasi, or you can't curse a president of your country, of your Jewish country, let's say. The nasi ba'amcha lo ta'ar, but it says only a nasi of your am. What does that mean, of your am? We darshan that. Be'oseh maseh amcha. If they do actions that are part of the communal actions, meaning they follow the rules. But if they don't follow the rule, the fact that they're a nasi doesn't mean you don't have to respect them. And the same would be true about a parent, right? And so you don't have to give respect to your parent if they are a thief. Says Gemara, you're right, but we're talking about a case, Kedamar of Pinchas, the second wide line, Bisha'asat Tshuva, where the father stole. He was a horrible person, but then he did Tshuva before he died. Says Gemara, well, Hachanami Basat Tshuva. Yasat Tshuva, my boy Gabe. So why do you still have the sports car? Right? If he did tshuva, why didn't he return the cow? Why didn't he return the begadim? He should have returned it. Right? That's a question. Says Gemara. Now, Tosas, of course, points out here, as we'll see in a second, what do you mean he should have returned it? We've been saying all day that if you steal something and decide you want to do tshuva, you don't have to return it. So what do you mean the father should have returned it? So Tosfos here says, again, there's different answers. He gives two answers. One is that whole question that you don't have to return it is only if it's something that's not identifiable. But if it's something that's identifiable, you do have to return it. We're going to see that in the Gemara in a second. So it's not that you don't return anything. It's that you don't return things that wouldn't sort of carry the reputation necessarily of what was going on. Says Gemara, well, you're right. He wanted to return it, but he died before he could. So speak the guy is on his deathbed, which is when a lot of people do tshuva, right? So he was lying on his deathbed. He was terminally ill, and he said, I feel bad on everything I did. I stole this, and I stole that, and I stole that, and then he died, right? So the kids don't have to give back the money, if that repeats, but they have to give back any object that would be identifiable, something that their father stole. Tashma. Now let's do another brighter, 4 lines from the wide lines. Hagazlanim, someone who steals, or malveh b'ribit, or lends money with interest. Afapi gavu, even though they collected, and we're just going to ask in a second, what do you mean they collect? What did they collect? Machsirin, you give it back to them. This is what? Gazlanim maisha gavuika. What do you mean the Gazlanim collected? If they stole it, they stole it. If they didn't steal, they didn't steal it. Igazol gazol, lo gazol, lo gazol. No. What we mean is the following. Hagazlanim, the people who are robbers, and what does that mean? Not people who walk into your house and steal things from you. It's the bankers. The people who lend with interest, which is a Torah way of stealing, basically, right? Even though they collected the money, meaning even though people gave them money, machzirim, they have to give it back when they do tshuva. Says more, but that goes against, this is why we're asking it. This goes against Rebbe. Rebbe says if you do tshuva, you don't have to give it back. Amri says, no, it means machsirim, that they have to give it back, but then you have to say, no, I won't take it from you, right? The dance, the kind of things that people do all the time. We have to give you the honor, and you have to decline the honor, right? So machsirim, you got to pay it back. The aim, mekabli mehem, you don't accept it from them. Says, well, then ela lama machsirim. So then why do you have to give it back if you know they're going to say no? The answer is, let's say tidei shamayim. It's to fulfill your responsibility, meaning you have to be willing to give it back, and then the person's not supposed to take it from you. Tashma, okay, I think it's one final case. We'll do a couple of final cases. Haroim, these are people who are very prolific at stealing. Shepherds, right? It's by definition. They're animals graze in lands that you have no idea where they are. They don't own it. We've talked earlier about why we don't allow shepherds, right, in Eretz Yisrael, right, nowadays. So roim. Or gabaim. Gabaim are like not tax collectors, like not tzedakah. No, so it's not specifically not. It's people who like take bribes, basically, who are the pekidim, the people in the city hall. V'amochzim, these are tax collectors. All these people, they steal from many people, right? They take bribes and they steal. And tshuvatam kasha. It's very hard for them to do tshuva because they have to identify who they stole from. It's going to be very hard to know. Umachzirin the makirem, but they should give back the money to the people they know they stole from. So anyone they can identify as having taken from, they should return to. So, but why? We just say you don't return it. Amri says, well, no, it means machzirim, they return it, but you don't accept it. Lama machzirim, so why are you doing it? Again, let's say tidei shamayim. It's in order to fulfill the responsibility. So ihachi, then why is it so hard to do tshuva? Right? It's hard to do tshuva because you're going to have to pay a lot of money, but you're not going to pay a lot of money because they're not going to accept it. Ihachi amai tshuvatam kasheh. The ode, and then look at the Seifa, Ima Seifa. The Braita continues and says, 3 lines from the bottom, She'ein makirin, right? Let's say a guy is a shepherd, and he knows he stole from 20 people, but he doesn't know who they are, right? So the ones he knows, he gives back to, it says. It continues the Braita, if you don't recognize the people you stole from, Ya'aseh bahem tzarchei tzipor. You should take the $10,000 that you know you stole and use it for public works. You should invest in waterworks, right? Invest in wells, which something people always need. They had a whole irrigation system. It says, but that you can't obviously virtually dig a well, right? If you're paying for a well, it means you're really paying. Ella lokasha, it says, well, you're right. Clearly, this bright is literally saying you should pay back. But Rebbe said you don't pay back. The difference is kodem kan takana kan acher takana. This bright was before Rebbe, right? In days before Rebbe, people actually paid back. Rebbe came along and said you don't pay back anymore. And says the Gemara, you know what? Hashadam Rav Nachman. Now that Rav Nachman taught us, the last line, B'she'ein gezela kayemet. This whole halacha of Rebbe, that you don't pay it back, is where the thing is not there anymore, right? Someone stole $1 million and they blew it in Vegas, right? So then tshuva is really hard because you don't have the money and you want to do tshuva and you can never pay it back. So that's where Rebbe said you don't have to pay it back. But if you still have the object and you want to do tshuva, you better pay it back, right? So therefore, it's only true that you don't have to pay it back if you no longer have the thing. But here, if so, it says where if that's true, afilu tema idividi lachar takana. This braita which says you pay back is after the takana, but it's referring to a case where you still have the money. The lokashia, turn to the top of daf tzadi and aleph. Kan bigzela kayemet, kan b'shein gzela kayemet. When the thing you stole is around, you better pay it back in real time. And if you don't know who you stole it from because you're a shepherd, then you better give it to the public and you use for public works. But if the thing is no longer extant, that's where Rebbe said you don't have to pay it back. Says Gemara, that's a great, beautiful answer. Second line of Tzadi Hey. But remember, the case of Rebbe was where the guy talked about the belt that he was wearing. So how could Rebbe make it takana that you don't have to pay it back if you said it doesn't apply when you're actually wearing the belt, right? V'ha'avneit, the case of the belt or the robe, let's say, the cloth, the gzela kayemeti, he was wearing it. And you're saying that Rebbe's gzera didn't even apply. So how could the story have any implication? The whole point of the story was to make it easier for this guy to do tshuva, right? But he's going to have to give back his clothes because he stole them. My avneit is more. No, avneit doesn't literally mean give back your belt. It means you won't even have a penny to buy a belt, right? It means demei avneit. Says where is that true? V'chol heicha digzela kayemet. I'm just going to read this for David for tomorrow. Anywhere where in fact the thing you stole is around, is you don't have to give it back. I'm sorry, you have to give it back. The rabbis didn't make a takana saying give back the money and don't give back the thing. Very marish. Remember the case, and this is what we talked about earlier, right? The case of the beam, where you steal a big beam, you build it into your house, it's standing right there. Everyone walks in the house, sees the beam that's stolen, and if you have to take it down, you got to destroy your whole house, right? And gzela kayemeti, the thing you stole is sitting right there. And Tnan, we learned in the Mishnah earlier, 30 days ago, Al Hamarish HaGazol Banu Bebira, they made a takana. If you steal a beam, you build it into your house, she told Damav, that you can give back money. You don't have to knock down your house and give back the beam. But this contradicts what you just said. You just said that if the object is still there, you actually have to physically give it back. No. Shani Hatam, that's different. Since you'd have to knock down the whole house in order to get out the beam, we treat it as if it's not there, right? It's inaccessible because in order to access it, you'd have to destroy the whole house. So then, Kivan Shavu Rabbanan Kedeleta, the Rabbanan made it like it's not there, meaning it's inaccessible. So when the Gezela is inaccessible, then there's two different things. Then either you pay nothing, is one case, and that's if you're a big-time thief or you can't afford it, or you just pay the value of the beam if it's a small thing. That's the kanat marish. But if it's not present, right, then, I'm sorry, but if it is present, then everyone agrees you have to give it back, and even though, because you can give it back without bankrupting yourself. Whew. So we got there, 2 dots, and David will pick it up from there tomorrow.
So in the case of money, where you use the money to buy something else,
Yes.
is that something else? You have to return that something else? You have to sell that something else and give back the money?
So money's a little different, right? Because money, in some sense, you never have to give back the money because money is called lahotza, right? But if you steal $1,000 and you buy, I don't know, something worth $1,000 with it, you always only give back money. The question really is, because it's always a shinoi. The question is, if let's say you steal an object and you change that object, you still give it back. So the halacha of the Mishnah was that you don't. If you make a shinoi in the object, you don't have to give back the thing you stole. You can keep it, and you have to give back the value of it. We're going to see.
Is that the case of the belt?
No. So the case. So Rebbe made a separate takana later, which I'm saying later, that if you're someone, and again, it's not clear who the takana applies to, but let's say it applies to someone who's a big-time thief, right? That if you come to do tshuva, we don't make you pay anything because we're afraid that if we make you pay anything, you're never going to do tshuva. And that was the case of the belt. This was a guy whose entire life was built on stealing, and he came to do tshuva, but he wouldn't have had anything if he had to give back the money, and therefore he doesn't have to give back anything. He's totally putter from giving back anything he stole.
So if you only steal a belt, you have to pay back for the belt. But if you steal your whole wardrobe, you don't have to pay back anything.
Potentially. So it's a big debate as to who this applies to, because it sounds very good for Gazlanim. You know. Tomorrow, I'll just give you a quick preview.
Suppose he wants to return it. So say he says, I'm doing tshuva.
Right.
I
Well,
mean,
so that's where, you know, I read the Gemara one way. There's other ways to read it. But remember that what we said was if you do accept it from that person, the rabbis hold you blamed, right? The one who was stolen from. You can't accept it. Now, it doesn't, I didn't read it that means you can't accept it. I meant you shouldn't accept it, right? The question is, let's say he forces you. And he's like, no, I really feel bad. I really want to do it. Can I give it to you? What would be the halacha then? So there's a lot of discussion about this because the Gemara leaves it a little bit unclear.
and with the ribbit, in that suppose someone is not lending money. Suppose the other person, say he gives for a short period of time, the other person assumes it's a loan, but it's not really a loan. He should have returned it right. It was never made a loan. So in that case, would he be able to say to him, listen, maybe you should give me back the amount of interest that I would have gained if I had the money?
So I think we have to hold all the interest questions till Bava Metzia, because we'll get there. I would say it's known for being one of the most complicated sugyot in all of the Gemara, all Shas, but we'll get there together. Okay. So tomorrow we'll continue go back to the Mishnah about the case of the pregnant cow that that was stolen and then gave birth. And the question is a lot of questions there, right? What do you have to give back? The money, the cow, the birth. What's the shinoi, right? Did the animal change by giving birth? Did it change at some other time by fattening it up? So tomorrow come to learn all about that tomorrow morning. Okay, everyone, have a great week. We'll see you all next Motzei Shabbat. I'll see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie.
Shabbat
What tov.
Thank you. Good night, Shavuot
See you for the halftime show.
Tov.